Welcome to Savage Minds. I'm your host, Julian Vigo. Today's guest is Diego Sequera, an award-winning journalist and writer based in Caracas. He's also co-founder of MisionVerdad.com, a research and analysis group. I welcome Diego Sequera to Savage Minds. People in Latin America, you all know what's going on. You've known this because of books like Venas Abiertas de América Latina, de Eduardo Galeano, among hundreds of other books. Open Veins of Latin America is a must-read, I would say, for any English speaker to understand what has gone on, not just from American foreign policy, but prior to that, the U.S. sort of took over where the British left off.
That's correct.
Could you talk to our listeners about this problem of what has gone on in your country? Because myself personally, as a New Yorker, I have some very dear friends who are from Venezuela, and one of whom, we can't discuss this topic kind of friend. So she comes from what most people would call an elite class. And we've seen those elite classes. Those are the same elite classes that have come over to the U.S. from Cuba after Batista was toppled. These are the same of the elite classes that moved to Paris, Los Angeles, Dallas, Texas from Tehran. And ironically, we're speaking in the midst of this false flag revolution in Iran, which you might want to touch upon. I'll tell you what, Diego, when this kicked off with the kidnapping of Maduro and his wife, I'm thinking, why are EU leaders doing this, pretending like this is a nothing burger? Second, last Monday, I expected the UN to do something a little harsh. No, that didn't happen. And then we see what happened shortly thereafter Maduro's kidnapping, the pirating of the ship in the North Atlantic, and of course, this recent false flag operation in Iran. So could you talk to us about, maybe let's begin with the history from Chavez and Chavismo, and let's start off there.
But yeah, that's quite descriptive also of, some of the historical gaps that has always been there since the start. And when I say since the start, I'm talking about, roughly between 92 and 99. I'll do my best to not, overextend myself on this, but I think that's important to realize. I mean, those years in which, a group of young officers led a failed uprising, militarily failed but politically successful uprising, rose into fame was in a moment in which two things were quite prevalent back then. First of it was the intense level of inequality, and at the same time as well, a constant messaging of that lifestyle that weren't able to reach, and which actually were fundamental in the popular uprising in 1989, in which depicted basically a Venezuela that was very much divided in a very strong way. Regardless of, there are nuances, of course, the possibilities of social escalation or the lack of very serious, visible class and race lines as other societies. I'm thinking, for example, the Andean societies such as Colombia, Peru. But anyways, beyond that point, this was a Venezuela that was profoundly unequal, and it was also profoundly obscene the way it was being managed, if you can call it that way. So this is, and most of the people, so this Chavez arrival through elections into office was basically a definitive response of a large segment of society, which included, by the way, part of the already being destroyed middle class of Venezuela. The years of neoliberalism, foreign debt, and the whole story that everybody knows. The thing is that the furies of history first were quite candid and blunt. And they basically, it was actually a struggle in which it was quite outspoken the way it was the battlefront was distributed and how one of the sides have to furtherly create an enemy that actually also touched on other several usual historical reflexes such as anti-communism or Cuba or whatnot. And so this was actually, what I'm trying to get here is how this was actually exploited in order to keep that gap going through the years and through so many attempts to, realign, disrupt, sabotage, coup, assassinate. I mean, and now proven any kind of resources in order to restore some quote unquote order regarding Venezuela. This constant line that you could see through the Chavez years, although many of these very people actually benefited deeply on the economic changes and the state reforms that came after that. Funny enough, I mean, you can call it even at some point some sort of, regarding consumerism, some sort of middle class populism. A lot of people also joined the middle class for the first time, highest salaries, and yes, a successful model up to that point that was able to defeat major challenges coming from many different places, and also clearly being seen that behind in each and every stage and every player, the U.S. was in different capacities behind it. At first stage was a very more conventional late 20th century type of view and tactics of regime change. But in mid 2000s, from 2000 on, it absorbed now the new resources from the experiences in the former Soviet Union of the color-coded revolutions and so on the grassroots level. They tried different. I mean, Gene Sharp and Helby have been around before that, but to take it to another level and using a new generation for this, my generation, by the way, for this on the other side, it changed tactics and deepened the resources and methodologies that were all of them put in place several years afterwards. Because beyond the point that they weren't successful, neither outside or inside, to go full regime change and against or harm deeply or hurt Venezuela's system through the Chavez years, it was different during when the Nicolás Maduro years started. And society was different, and even, I might say, the angst of parts of society were also evolving. I know many people. I mean, there was this moment between 2013 and this will make sense in a minute. Between 2013 and 2014, that after Comandante's death, there were a lot of. I mean, society itself was kind of like re-encountering itself after, for whatever reason, polarized moments. At least on the media narrative level, it wasn't that same on that level in society, and but this was parallel to the urgency to seize the opportunity to, based on the conclusion that Nicolás Maduro wasn't Chavez, to do something to finally give like the final push to regime change, which didn't succeed. And this is a moment when violence had a different manifestation. And it was in parallel, by the way, with what was going on in Maidan. And this now, especially in hindsight, it's not a coincidence. I'm talking about the coup in 2014 in January, February in Ukraine. And at the same time, we were facing a color-coded revolution, pretty violent, and led by people, well, by three persons in particular. Antonio Ledesma, which is like the most irrelevant outside of Venezuela of the three, but very active in Spain. Leopoldo Lopez, which is more famous, and Maria Corina Machado. And this, and I'm talking about the other side of this, I mean, this was a fracture of trying to split society one more time and to deepen the divisions in order to to set up to lay out this setting in which there was to be this key aspect of confrontation of one of the many resources that were going to be in place based on all the hybrid tactics that were already showing themselves from the Arab Spring onwards, and including, of course, Ukraine, Venezuela, Syria in particular, and so on, and became basically the template, the rational. From that moment, I mean, at a second stage, I mean, it was like after the beta stage of the early 2000s in, Kyrgyzstan and Ukraine properly, etc. This became also, paradoxically, the raw material for the law that was sanctioned by the Senate ending 2014. I think it's the Human Rights and Civil Society, the Venezuelan Human Rights and Civil Society Act. It was pushed by many people that now are actually condemning what's going on against Venezuela. I'm thinking about Democrat Senator Tim Kaine, for example, who actually were among the people that sponsored and that supported this kind of legislation going forward. And then the Obama decree came on January, which issued an executive order that started this sanction program against Venezuela. What was deepening through, who got tougher throughout the years, especially after 2017 when the oil industry was aimed. So these are all like the baselines that have been either Democrats or Republicans have been using in different ways in order to, to reach what happened just on January the 3rd, 2026. And because most of them failed, be it sanctions, being the attempts to create a parallel state or kidnap any of the Venezuelan powers of the state in order to disrupt and open the gates to foreign intervention, be it created fake presidents, be it trying several times to make us fight against each other trying to lure us into the possibility of some sort of civil war. These are all the resources that failed and brought us to the point in which we are now. And I highlight this because this would also explain the way many people are, and especially from the left, like you said, that are actually, playing it's complicated card with Venezuela. Like, yes, I mean, we don't like Maduro, but this is bad. At the same time, this wasn't a democratic society, whatever. Because this involved everything we're talking about, and also involved character assassination, be it against the president, against the government, against Venezuela as a country, and Venezuelan society. And if this is not the case, just look at how they now see the Venezuelan migrants that are being deported and the way they're being framed. So all these threats, all these strands have been used, has been used to set up something that if they didn't directly succeed, they were useful enough to build this common sense that now it's at play and trying to, reduce, in some cases, the impact of what's going on and what actually it has unleashed afterwards. Yes, we talked about you mentioned many Western players that basically are like diffusing the impact and how dramatic this is. But you also had some different reactions that we haven't seen before, coming from Spain, for example. Actually joining in a joint statement with the progressive countries of Latin America, Chile, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, condemning what happened. I think that's a different one. And also even Frank-Walter Steinmeier, referring to the Venezuelan case, addressing the U.S. as a barbaric country, basically. These are different reactions, but still, yes, I understand that. The thing is that what I'm trying to say before this digression regarding Europe is that people are not aware of the amount of suffering that has needed to be imposed against Venezuela in order to try to weaken its position, weaken from within, and make more palatable and justifiable a U.S. intervention like they did now. And it even to that point, it didn't work. Now, we all know the obvious reasons of why this is happening here on the more raw level, which is, of course, resources, oil and several mineral deposits, gas, and so on. We also are quite aware, and it has been repeated constantly, and it has to be repeated constantly, that this was also against reasserting hegemony in order to also expel the multipolar players outside of the region and to also dispel the possibilities and options of different kinds of cooperation and engagement globally. We have also heard, which is also true, because this has many layers to it, that also this is a way to try to desperately get a hold to something that would allow the petrodollar system, the dollar itself, to not falling apart. We also know that Venezuelan resources also, it's kind of like, in a very raw sense, in a very unsophisticated way, it could be like a lifeline if, in any case, Iran closes the Hormuz Strait, and also based on this hegemony. But I think it has to be more highlighted the fact that this was also about punishment on several levels. This is about domesticating a society. This is about, setting an example of basically a country deciding a different path, a different possibility, and doing everything to either, destroy it or poison its soul, and pushing all this common sense and also exploiting our, historical differences and weaknesses and low points in culturally wise in order to enhance this idea that there are two brutally different Venezuelas, which there aren't. But you do got people from the outside that have been living from the outside, they embody many of these accommodated class that never actually benefited or felt close to the country, and actually are able to just celebrate these kind of things with people also, I would say, poisoned, which describes precisely how far and how perverse it has to be to reach to this point, and how self-destructive this becomes on the long run, and not on the long run anymore, I think, for the aggressors in this case. And look how instantly this has been also being at play against Iran just immediately after they considered Venezuela was, at least at this moment, done, and we can focus on something else. And now it's Iran that's being targeted. And if you contrast what the sources, be it like the massive ones from the outside, from the diaspora, one more time, or be it from the inside, the one that actually shows the nature of the riots, how at first legitimate protests were hijacked, which is usually the same case. Protests that were actually tolerated by the government then became extremely violent, and there was a clear geography in Western Iran that describes what is also being clearly stated, that the participation of Mossad assets on the preparation and grooming and training and organizing people that were willing and actually killed security officers, random citizens, burned mosques in Iran in general, burned the Quran. I mean, this far, and suddenly saying And yes, it was being toughly addressed because people are not cognizant of this kind of threats when you are looking at it from the inside. And I also come from a country that went through precisely the same thing several times. And this is not, this is not inside. Really, I mean, this is not wrapped up inside the minds of many people who hasn't gone through this or are starting now to see a version of this. And so now we have this gap in Iran in which things are quite calm, and also not only that, I mean, they have a cool down. I mean, and also you have massive demonstration, either supporting the government and or denouncing U.S., Israel, and the hijackers of the whatever manifestation, whatever demonstrations were rooted on, and try to force. Well, now the rumors are usually this is. I mean, we're in January the 14th, if I'm not mistaken, and the rumors are just insane about the possibilities of military action also in Iran. So this it goes beyond, regardless of all the harm, destruction we're talking about. This goes beyond this point, and it reaches, and it has even far-reaching shockwaves. And if you haven't been paying attention, just look at how the military budget was in the U.S. was actually raised up to $1.5 trillion just some days ago. Exactly. So these are all. Look about the whole Greenland thing, which is, I mean, it is farcical in a Marxist sense. One more time, I mean, this could have been tragic. These are tragic events on the grand scheme of things, but they're also so farcical on every level regarding all the players. And this is also happening after what has happened in Venezuela. So how much are we talking about here of democracy, liberation, drugs? I mean, even the quote unquote drug problem. How much of these things are actually at play now? They're basically non-existent. It's as blunt as we've seen. It's the problem. It's oil, and another problem that I might add, which is also, I mean, it has been also neglected to some extent, and that's also explains the attack on the seizing of Russian tankers and also the drone attacks in the Black Sea of Russian vessels by the West, not Ukraine, the West. And at the same time also raiding Venezuelan tankers or Chinese flag-carrying tankers, because this proves precisely that sanctions, other than also being illegal, they just don't work. Venezuela, for example, was able to grow economically, macroeconomically, after being in hell, taming on a macroeconomic level. I still remind they tame inflation according to the Economic Agency for Latin America of the UN, CEPAL in Spanish. It was the 2025 the fastest growing economy. To some extent, the economy was able to diversify within this framework with strong limitations. And to some extent, of course, it's not perfect, and there's a lot. There's still a lot to be done, and it recovered with strong limitations and with help its oil industry, regardless of what the oil executive in that Trump meeting say. So this proves also that sanctions can be circumvented, that allies can overcome them, and this sets another example of success under the worst conditions possible, and a sign of also of a humiliating level to one of empire's favorite tools. So this is everything going on at the same time. I'm sorry if this was too much of a lengthy and zigzagging response.
No, it's excellent. It's just a lot of people listening, let's just face it, English speakers, I'll be to the bone on this. English speakers, and I mean Canadians, Americans, Australians, British, lesser extent Irish, because the Irish understand this nonsense. They've been there, done it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, they have their sensibility about this kind of things.
Yeah, well, because of what they've personally gone through their history.
For clear reasons, yeah, of course. And recently,
If you could explain to these listeners from countries where they're getting bombarded with propaganda. Oh my gosh, I spent the morning looking at the footage from Iran. It was embarrassing to me as a human to watch the BBC. They highlighted this British comedian who was born and raised in the UK. His parents are from Iran. In front of a wall video of the pro-government demonstrations, whilst both he and their nincompoop presenters, because they really don't know what they're talking about, were presenting this as anti-government demonstrations. It's insane. The same thing, of course, happened with your government. We'll go back to Hugo Chávez and that love-hate relationship that the West has with any kind of Latin American country that dare elect a leader that is even slightly left of center. Could you maybe discuss this problem with how the U.S. and what is now being called the quote-unquote Monroe Doctrine, but even back to the Monroe Doctrine, this arrogance, this colonial arrogance of being able to have sway over two continents?
Yeah, I think more than two continents in that sense, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, it's good to remind, you know, the wonderful Chalmers Johnson, you know, the political scientist and someone who actually deepened the concept of blowback to a very illuminating level. But he used to say that in the age of empires, the unit of administration on where they occupy was the colony, and in the case of the United States, is the military base and its ramifications. So in that sense, we can talk about control of every nook and cranny of state in the global south. But we can also talk about that vassalship that also was expanded all these years, and thinking that it didn't exist, or that it wasn't a threat for post World War II order Europe. And now I think it's quite clear on how it's being used also as a platform for aggression anywhere else, and they basically have full support of their countries. But how brings the question of if this is the measure that we're going to take, Chalmers Johnson's one, where is actually the backyard then? Venezuela has no U.S. military base, for example. And I don't know, think about how many military bases are in Western Europe. You have like a large backyard with a larger pool. Anyway, but thinking about this, yes, I mean, it is ingrained in our history. The North-South relationship of the Western Hemisphere, to call it in some way, you know, and also I would like to address something that is also there, in spite of what my anti-imperialist friends could say, and also I share that view to that extent. But also there are these strange nuances in which like-minded people between the lines actually helped and supported each other. I mean, Francisco de Miranda had participated in the Pensacola battle. And Francisco de Miranda was they call it el precursor here. He's actually like the forefather of South America independence, one of them, one of the most important, and one of the most active also, and was also involved deeply in of course, Venezuela's war of independence at the early stage. Quite an impressive character if you get to know him. But he military participated in the U.S. war of independence back then, and he was friends with General Knox among others, and he knew all the guys, Thomas Paine and many of the founding fathers of the United States, and also from the French Revolution. But anyway, what I'm trying to say here, that you also have positive small threats that also are there, and also, I mean, and the shape it took in 1823 when the Monroe's doctrine started, I think I follow the LaRouche crowd in this when they stress that it was written by John Quincy Adams. As you know, it was, well, one of the first people to warn about the dangers of foreign adventures at some point. And it took, of course, and at that point, America for the Americans took different shapes. The one we are actually more aware of, and the one that has been the most destructive one, it was the one that comes after, the final shape, it was with the Roosevelt corollary in 1904, which basically goes further, and it's not only America for the Americans against European colonies, empires. It was also about, paraphrasing to some extent, if inside the region we don't like what we're seeing, they're unable to solve their problems, we have the right to go in there and solve them ourselves. And if you know, this is the moment in which the 1,000 Days War in Colombia ended with the creation of Panama, the succession of Panama under a peace treaty written by J.P. Morgan and signed on a U.S. military ship in the shores of Panama, and also the several invasion of Haiti, Dominican Republic, Venezuela had a naval blockade back then, and was actually was a naval blockade for debt paying by the Germans, the Italians, and the French, and the U.S. also came and expelled them from the region, and it took the shape it took, and basically that's the Monroe Doctrine that we know. That's the Monroe Doctrine that has been understood throughout the 20th century, and is correctly understood in the way we have been suffering it. And now with the national security strategy, we have like this PR rekindling, which is kind of, as dangerous and arrogant as everything that has been written, if you follow let's call it the text, the literature, since inauguration last year. And they call it, the Trump corollary now, which basically says that and I think extra hemispheric actor will be allowed to control resources, assets, and choke points on the Western Hemisphere, because this is all the U.S. Sphere of control, not influence, control. Funny enough, it also shows, if you do some short, fast hermeneutics, and also a update of the colonial imagination. There's no saying of the actual legal sovereign stakeholders of the resources, choke points, and assets inside the continent, and it all focuses on the big game, because it doesn't matter, according to that view, who's there. No one is there according to them. Nothing is happening until they get there. It's funny how this weird mix of real estate, New York real estate mobster vision with classic colonialism operating there in a way that's pretty blunt, and it goes beyond also all the the fragments of this that some people just highlighted as definitive, like, I don't know, all the identitarian stuff. This is like hardcore primary colonialism with now being led by, I don't know, by people who run in mostly a fictitious economy, which is the cloud oligarchs and the robber barons, which also have a big stake on what's going on in Iran, because also there's this other player here, of course, that it's hard to not to see, which is, it's not as obvious as others, which is Israel. In the case of Latin America, it's completely in the open. In the case of Iran, just remember Mike Pompeo's tweet of some days ago saying, sending his regards to the the demonstrators, to the rioters, and to the Mossad agents walking beside them. So anyway, all of this, coming back to the Monroe thing, this has been the way it has. Our countries have been, well, swinging from liberation to control for most of its Republican life after we overcame in the 19th century our usual internal caudillo fights. And it wasn't with this happening throughout the region in its different manifestations, but overall the same kind of picture. This is what actually was, with the arrival of Chavez into power, started to unfold and started to have reactions and responses and replicas through the region, because basically we were fed up of the humiliation, of the violence, of the larceny, and the draining of our resources, the hollowing out of whatever national asset we had back then, and the quality of life for people,
Well, can we talk about that for a second, actually? Because
Yes.
this is what I get on my wall. I get attacked by a lot of people because I have a public wall on Facebook and elsewhere. And of course, people say, well, you're not seeing this side of the story, or you're not looking at those people over there. Can you sort of give a backdrop as to who voted for Chavez and Maduro? Why the West has, well, let's just say not all the West, but yeah, I mean, Spain wasn't great last week at the UN either. They tried to sort of skate this wall of, wasn't great what the Donald did, but we don't agree with the election results either, which is a really inappropriate response to the kidnapping of a leader. Sorry. And again, Americans grew up in 88, 89, that era of the siege of Panama. So I think what I call frenemies, a love story, our relationship with these dictators that when there are, excuse the expression, but when there are bitches, all good. But when they decide they don't want to listen to us anymore, then all of a sudden we invade. And we've seen this. We're living it on a daily basis since 9/11. So this is the deal. Americans have been corralled into this idea that Chavez was anti-democracy, that Chavez was a dictator. They copy and pasted this routine onto Maduro. And even with legacy media reporting, well, Venezuela doesn't actually produce those drugs. Venezuela is not a route of transport for these opioids that have been killing Americans in the thousands. But let's not worry about facts, right? You still have, despite Americans' access to social media, to the web, they can Google this, they can check it out on any search engine of their choice, yet people are buying into it. And then the Machado, Jesus, okay, let's talk about Machado, because that was transparent to me. I was very pleased that Julian Assange did his attempt at reporting this through the legal methodologies available to him. I'm not surprised that it was dismissed. I'm not at all surprised, because this is what's going on. You know, I'm a Canadian and American. We grew up with this ridiculous cinema of Mr. Smith goes to Washington and the little man can fight and win, and we are on the side of justice. And you're seeing this with the rhetoric around Iran as well. Like, we are the go-to democratic state. And this is further and further and further from the truth every day I breathe. I am horrified that we kidnapped a sitting leader, whether or not we like how he was elected, whether or not we agree. And you've got these people called the Squad. Ocasio-Cortez, where the hell is she? Where's Sanders? All of these people are paid for, politicians. When I taught at the Universidad de las Americas in Mexico, you know, I was aware that Americans looked at Mexico and Mexicans as this kind of subcategory of excellence, despite Our Hollywood cinema, the best directors are coming from Mexico. Skip down. I was teaching at Universidad de los Andes in 1990. And again, I was aware that I was teaching at a very elite university, in fact. I was in this amazing city, like anyone who hasn't been to Bogota should go. It is an amazing city, the culinary tradition of your country, oh my God, you get to Bolivia and there's 500 types of potatoes and sizes, and I've eaten purple and pink potatoes, yapingachos, all of it. It's amazing, the entire tradition. But you ask a university educated American, and I don't mean in physics, I mean in history, in the humanities.
Social science,
And you ask them about who was Simón Bolívar, I can guarantee that 99% will have no clue, and that often the 1% might even just say, I saw his face on some money once. The abyss of historical knowledge of my people is embarrassing.
And functional.
Well, that too, because it's whack-a-mole. We've got all these dictators to take out. And like I said at the beginning of the show, when I didn't see appropriate responses from world leaders, especially in the EU, and now I see that they were working on Iran. And I don't mean all of them, but there was knowledge that Iran was about to kick off. And they let it happen. And they let it happen because there's a bit in common here. And let's, besides the history of the U.S. deposing leader after leader after leader, even, that infamous quote by Franklin Delano Roosevelt when he was asked by a journalist about then dictator Anastasio Somoza. And he says, he's a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. Oh, Americans that have no idea who Sandino was, because they associate Sandino with the Contras, who were there to liberate Nicaraguans from Sandinismo. And it's like, no.
You know that Sandino considered himself a Bolivarian, by the way, a son of Bolivar.
Yeah, and Sandino was under great threat of assassination much of his life. Carlos Fonseca. Oh, Sandino did his education as well in Mexico. You have a great tradition of people going to Mexico to save their lives. Trotsky, that didn't work out so well for him. But, the idea is that, I was in the mountains of Matagalpa when I saw a truckload of bicycles coming through. This was during the Violeta Chamorro running for president, right? They were giving out bicycles to people, saying you can have a bicycle for kids if your parents vote for Chamorro, yeah? And I saw it with my own eyes. On that same day, I was on a bus heading from Matagalpa towards Managua. We were shot at. Hide on the other side, and these were bullets paid for by my government. Yeah, Contras. So Americans don't really understand history because they're spoon-fed the Zapatistas. Bad. Okay, let's shut that down. Story of a bad John Wayne film where over and over we have the white hats, you wear the black hats, and we're going to come in and fix it. And this has not fared so well for U.S. reputation online, however, because you're seeing the under 30 crowd is not having it, including Republican Americans. For the first time in my life, I'm seeing Republicans push back on war, speak badly about interventionism. They regret, and in fact, they're more open-minded in many ways than these Democrats who are not really leftists at all. At least the Republicans say, we got 9/11 and all of what happened since wrong. We shouldn't be involved in overturning governments. We shouldn't be involved in these wars. We shouldn't be involved in deposing leaders. So this is happening on the under 30, 35 front. Here we are. Now, in the throes of 10 days from the kidnapping of your president, we've got this staged revolution in Iran. And there's something in common with both countries because both countries coincidentally have oil.
Precisely. And many other raw materials and resources and 90 million very well prepared people.
So the energy deal that President Trump, he's openly stated that access to Venezuelan oil was a core reason for the action. How will the newly established great energy deal for marketing Venezuelan crude affect your country's OPEC standing and internal sovereignty? And I mean, of course, I sort of like your vice president a lot. At least so far, she's holding it. Delcy Rodriguez has cajones. I love her. So I was really impressed that she didn't come out and play the whole I love the US become basically a paid operative.
Yeah.
Her presidency now, does this suggest a complete rejection of domestic negotiations in favor of a managed transition? Is she going to be able to say no to these oil deals? Because this is, again, I've said this since the US took a tanker. I said
Yeah.
those Somali pirates are somewhere having a good laugh. So can you talk about this in terms of Delcy Rodriguez's presidency and in terms of what Trump plans and how this will affect Venezuela's OPEC standing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one.
I
Um,
know.
but it's fundamental to understand it, and the attempts, at least at this point, and what they're trying to do, because up to this point, when things are still developing in a very fast way in order to grasp the whole thing, and you have to just manage your way to see it, and then uh, later on, in hindsight, you're gonna see some things better than now, of course, especially with something that's new, that's uncharted, that's different on this contemporary times, and regardless of how it rhymes historically, basing on what we've been saying up to this point, of course, and how far-reaching it actually is, but at the same time how chaotic, because there doesn't seem to be like a coherent plan after the kidnapping and the bombing of Caracas after the war, and so you can see also one thing is what Trump says, and another thing is what actually others are saying. Think of, for example, yeah, we already know what he says it's going to happen, and how, according to him, Venezuela's oil industry and oil input, it's under U.S. control. The U.S. is the one that's going to trade with that oil. The money from that revenue, Venezuela will have to buy only U.S. goods. China can't buy this oil, but it has to buy it to the United States. And the Venezuelan oil industry will be reconstructed, and big oil would pay for that, would subsidize this, and Venezuela will be great again. That's basically like the public ration blueprint that Trump, I don't know, hurled out of his mind into social media. And we saw that the meeting precisely with big oil wasn't as successful as it seemed. And you also saw the change of tone. It was going to be, this is going to be, in 10 days, it's going to be wonderful. He said, like, it's going to take a long time and more money. And this is going to be, and after that, it's going to be a challenging and massive investment, which big oil is going to fund. And and the response of people of types, the Exxon types and so on, is basically, well, this is not that easy. This is far more complicated. This will take far more time. We also need full regime change because we need to adjust the framework the legal framework to our benefit, and so it's not happening at this point. Also, the model in which it has been setting up the agreements with the players that are acting already with the Venezuelan oil and talking with the Venezuelan government are not that different of the of the Biden licenses that allowed Chevron to operate in Venezuela. So there's nothing legally new there in that sense. And there's, as far as I know, there's a lot of speculation on which accounts, what bank, in what kind of fund this Venezuelan oil revenue money is going to be in. I think that's not clear either. But regardless of implementation at this point, the reasons for doing this are even more clear now. Regarding your question of OPEC in all of this. And yeah, Trump has already said at some point he's going to drop the price of the barrel if he has Venezuela under control. And this, of course, will be and have a significant impact on oil producing countries like Iran, like Russia, even many in the Middle East, in the Arab world, in Western Asia. So it will bring, according to that, new leverage on the energy front from the United States, according to that. Now, that's what he's stating. He's saying he's doing it this way, controlling or kidnapping Venezuelans' oil revenue and legal president, and this is how it's going to work. But we're not there yet. That's one thing. Now, regarding Delcy Rodriguez and Venezuela, mind you that Delcy Rodriguez was actually the one that implemented the restoration of the oil industry and the taming of the inorganic destruction of the Venezuelan economy based on sanctions and based on boycott and based on a country that saw, by the way, a drop of 99% of its oil revenue 6 years ago. And she's the one that actually led the country out of the woods in that sense and into some new sense of normalcy, regardless the whole chokehold that sanctions and economic boycott mean factually to Venezuela, to Venezuelan society. And also the goal of obfuscating everyone, especially in the West, especially in the United States, and calling this the whole Venezuelan crisis, to just put a mild word also, as something based basically on one, mismanagement, and two, socialism doesn't work. And trying to just, and also, of course, led by this sort of banana republic guy instead of probably one of the most sophisticated political minds currently. And I'm talking, yes, about Nicolás Maduro, because Nicolás Maduro was actually character assassinated far more intensely, destructively than even Hugo Chávez, to a point that it succeeded from the left. And we're up to see what's going to happen in that sense with Delcy Rodriguez. They're already spinning the idea of betrayal and so on, and some sort of, internal replacement with agreement with the United States. That's all BS, honestly. And let's talk about Delcy Rodriguez for a moment. I don't know. You're very knowledgeable of Latin American history. I don't know if you know who Jorge Rodriguez was in Venezuela during the 70s, especially the first 5 years. Jorge Rodriguez was a very gifted, talented leader, and very socially sensitive, and yeah, with a flair. And he was part of the legal. Yeah, these are still the years between the most open wide way of the guerrilla insurgency was over, but many left-wing organizations had the legal front and the military front, and they did operations and so on, but he was on the civilian side of the story, and he was on the social struggle. He was on the grassroots organizing front, and also in the parliamentary action front. This is where he operated. He was kidnapped and tortured and became one of the most famous and most scandalous cases in Venezuela during the 70s. This was Delcy Rodriguez's father. And Jorge Rodriguez, also the president of the National Assembly. This is where she comes from. She comes from a household in which her father was tortured to death because of his political beliefs and his political action, of course. That's part of the iteration of national security doctrine during the 70s, which involved a lot of torture and disappearance and killings, of course. With the support of Cubans, by the way. With the support of Posada Carriles, Orlando Bosch, they were part of the repressive system. They tortured directly people and they interrogated directly people. Luis Posada Carriles was called Comisario Basilio back then. And so this is where she comes from. This is, and also she's a very well Oxford trained politician and legal, especially and specialized in international law. I mean, we're talking, and also it's funny because at some point, in some interviews, some people has asked me, and also some close forums, if she was as strong as Nicolás Maduro and Hugo Chávez. And boy, and because they were skeptical about her, and boy, that's not the question you need to ask. I mean, because she is a tough one. And I can even say she could be tougher than the other ones facing this kind of threats and this kind of challenges, and also the wits to do this. And also, which is important, there is a plan. And this plan was set up before. This was also outlined with President Maduro in case precisely this happened. So there's not that level of improvisation or submission in the way that Delcy Rodriguez is now maneuvering this unprecedented situation in which they try to turn Venezuela back into a feudal hacienda regime. And there's a U.S. equivalent, company towns. I just saw a wonderful, and I truly recommend to see it, a wonderful video by Brian Berletic of the New Atlas. I think he's one of the brightest decoders of what's going on, not only in Venezuela, but regarding empire in general. But I fully agree with most of what he says in that video, and also the piece he published. And I really encourage people to check them out because it's a wonderful explainer that could be helpful to make a lot of people also understand what's going on. So at this moment, there's this complex gray area in which the clash between what Trump says, reality does, and how Venezuela it's actually maneuvering might not be quite clear, but these are like the three movements going on, because Delcy Rodriguez has to manage a situation in which we have a president hostage with a gun pointed at his head, and also the first lady, Cilia Flores. The country economically is at that same level, with also the threats of extra strikes and bombardments, because this is still a war. And at the same time, uphold something that also has been part of the Venezuelan position, even a week before he was kidnapped. Nicolás Maduro was talking about, we need to train, we have to have decent dialogue with the United States, which was several years ago Venezuela's main oil buyer, its main client during Chavez years and during early Nicolás Maduro years. So those kind of contradictions are quite at play here. And also, this thick outlining doesn't deal with the massive amount of implications and technicalities on finance, on international law, on sanctions regime, on economics, on legal aspects, and everything else. So this is also, and blowback. So this is our all unintended consequences of a very short sugar high win up to this point. That, yes, it's going to move faster because this is also a manifestation of weakness. Trump's trolling and posting in his unipersonal social media account a picture of him, a Wikipedia picture of him saying that the interim president or acting president of Venezuela is not a sign of wits or strength. It's a sign of the other. These are all manifestations of decline and the urgency to address this before it gets worse. But I think it is also accelerating, and it's creating a wider and more branched catch-22 situation for empire.
You're listening to Savage Minds, and we hope you're enjoying the show. Please consider subscribing. We don't accept any money from corporate or commercial sponsors, and we depend upon listeners and readers just like you. Now, back to our show. It's phenomenal to watch. The more that he and his cadre push on this narrative, the more it fails. And
Yeah.
it's failing with the younger demographic, but other people are getting sick of it because back home, we've got people dying of hunger. This is the story that isn't being told.
Yes, I mean, yes, I'm sorry to interrupt at this point, but I mean, yes, and you remind me of something else. Because they say subsidize Venezuela and the operation, and it's going to be the oil. Who do you think is actually going to do it? It's the oligarchical slush fund, which is taxpayer money. That's the one that's going to pay for this. So this is so important because, as you said, there was this mirror moment in polls between Venezuela and the United States regarding U.S. government doing, and both at the same time reflected the same thing. On one side, Venezuela, they were against U.S. intervention. They didn't believe that this will work for the benefit of Venezuela, and they didn't agree with the fact that the United States had this amount of say regarding Venezuelan's own matters. You had the same on the other side, precisely on demographics. You had precisely the same thing. You have people seeing through the narrative and not believing the whole drug thing. You have people believing at the same time that this doesn't work, won't improve their life whatsoever, and they don't agree with the militarization. Back then, I think those were the words, at least on the Ipsos one, with the militarization of the Caribbean. So yes, I mean, it's further people who knows, and yeah, interestingly enough, there are more interesting stuff going on the right than on the left spectrum in the United States. Funny enough, yeah, you just mentioned that disgraceful Bernie tweet saying that Nicolás Maduro was a dictator, but I mean, fuck him. We don't need Bernie. We don't need the Quad. We don't need any of that. And also, even more cynical, and I said it before, I mean, the Democrats, either by sponsoring, supporting, or lobbying to laws that punished further the Venezuelan government through sanctions throughout all this decade, and supporting every other misadventure against Venezuela, and suddenly are not agreeing with what's happening now. It's as cynical as it gets. I mean, it works for us. It makes sense that on Senate and Congress, the Trump administration doesn't have it that easily, but that's because it works for their benefit in internal politics, not because they're concerned about us, and it's surely not because they don't have a shared responsibility on this bipartisan strategic interest. And also, now outside of the institutional frame, aren't all these libs and progs and so on aware of how much they are contributing through language into the acknowledgement of all these talking points to taking it to a country to reach exactly this point when everything else failed, and now they're able to do this because there's enough common sense, quote unquote, in media spectrum and social media and so on that's going to give precisely this mixed response instead of completely condemning this the destruction and this exceptionalization of international law. I mean, that's how much they are not aware. This is still on them until they really change that. I mean, Adam Schiff, for crying out loud. It's another one that has been from Congress so worried about what's going on in the Caribbean. But he's really much ingrained in military-industrial complex. But if you go further, if you find, for example, people like Anne Applebaum, there are other concerns that go even beyond this, which is precisely how viable this is all. Not the fact that this is happening, but how useful and how functional it is in the long term, for empire. Jesus, I mean, this is all happening at once. Isn't this enough of descriptive elements to people to start to realize that this is not only against them, that this is the ones that are against them trying to even defend the mindset, the view, and of course the narrative, because the narrative has also been destroyed since Gaza, and this is what's putting everything on censorship and global censorship and everything else on overdrive.
Right. Well, there's been an ongoing genocide in Gaza now. We're going on
Still.
2 years and 3 months. And paradoxically, the very same outlets, and they're all guilty, CNN, MSNBC, the BBC, they have been ignoring it. They refuse to use the word. I don't know if you saw that around Nicolás Maduro, the BBC sent their staff a guidance saying that thou shalt not use the word kidnap. Absolutely anti-democratic.
The same way they're not allowed to use the word genocide.
Exactly. And that's my point, is that lead up to Iran last summer, no one was critiquing that. They were making this out to be aviation exercise light. This is insane. And then Piers Morgan, my God, it took him, he's finally understood that there's a genocide. It took him almost 2 years to get here. But now, if you tune in to his show, I believe yesterday.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw the clip with Marandi, for example.
Exact. And it's a circus because, of course, he has this Canadian politician who she's touted as Iranian. Okay, 1 year of age, she came to Canada. That was insane. Her demeanor, I don't even care if she were charged with facts. She wasn't. For that side she represents, it was a very bad look. She looked, unhinged.
She was.
And she lied the whole way through.
And threatened Mohammed and threatened him.
And she was outraged that he was able to defend the protest the other day. This is what they're saying. It wasn't a protest. It was a pro-government rally. I'm on Twitter this morning.
Of course.
I was trying to, even through AI, find out who are the people on the ground who might be able to be contacted. AI is giving me every shill in town, every single one. And so I go on to one of them and I'm checking out how objective their coverage is. He shows the streets. The camera pans left. It pans, you see tens of thousands of people just peacefully marching on the street. And
it reached 1 million yesterday.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it was definitely in the millions. And it says underneath, because this is only a small section of the street, and it says the anti-government protest. This was not anti-government anything. This was a Kumbaya festival. Anyways, this is why, if Americans could only understand, imagine after the election, one of our many elections that are very close, or where the electoral vote turned it, but not the popular vote. Imagine if Chavez had sent up airplanes and said, we're going to save you from this evil Bush. Remember? No, that didn't happen, right? You had a lot of debates. You had even magazines that popped up online because of this. You had a lot of angry Americans who the Democrats became very anti-electoral college. But we did not see an invasion of our country because this was deemed, and it was deemed as illegitimate, even by Europeans. They're like, what's an electoral college? And you have to explain to them. What we're seeing now is this fiction that has been piggybacked within the European Union. My theory, honestly, Diego, is because Starmer knew that there was a tanker that they needed the U.S. to help out on. So he got help in the North Atlantic. They all knew what was going to go down in Iran. So they shut up. The idea that you can even put into question another country's electoral processes while legitimizing kidnapping, to me, beggars belief. So here's my next question. With reports of over 100 deaths and widespread blackouts following the strikes, how is the civilian population reacting on the ground? Is there a rally around the flag effect or further fragmentation? And despite the capture, the Venezuelan military immediately recognized Delcy Rodriguez as the acting president. Does this indicate a failure of the U.S. goal to trigger widespread military defections?
Yeah, both questions are important. And yes, I do think that when they did this and they didn't thought through enough, or maybe they did actually, there wasn't any possibility to succeed if they're just going to replace the government with Maria Corina Machado. They said it, and it wasn't able to control the situation. And quoting Trump himself, saying she's not respected enough by anyone, for that matter. And And it also shows precisely not a weak state, not a weakened state, not a failed state. It shows a very highly functional state that's able to keep control of the country, to rule, to govern, to have governance, and even acknowledged by them. So that's also a narrative failure right there. Of course, short-term memory audience will even think about when we were talking about the humanitarian crisis, and now look, they have to acknowledge the existence of the Chavista state. So yeah, and the military card is the one they have been obsessively playing since a long while ago. And also, they always wanted, and this is also why they did it the way they did it, the kidnapping of President Maduro, is because, one more time, I've said this several times, if you follow the literature, the think tank literature, and the recommendations of officials or so on, before the attacks, they all recommended that the best case scenario would be some sort of, without discharging what happened, raids of this kind. But the best options were long-range attacks and also relying on internal movements in order to topple the government and to do regime change and basically us doing their bid. And I guess in that scenario, bringing over Maria Corina Machado to rule the country, which she won't be able to. And it's even a fact acknowledged by the United States itself. They're going to meet tomorrow, Thursday, by the way, they say, at the White House. And I wasn't in Caracas when it happened. I was traveling back to Caracas from Colombia when it happened. So I have my own personal, it's not shame, but the lack of full comprehension of what happened in my hometown that day, that early morning. And I've been actually, which every people I talk to, I always ask, how was it? In different ways, not as straightforward. People who I talk to in the streets, and if you know Caracas, you can talk to anyone here, and everyone will have something to say to you. And so I asked the questions about, well, what happened? Where were you? How was it for you? How did you feel? Whatever. And I got a lot of different reactions, but they all also, of course, agree in one thing. It was horrible. It was, some people are traumatized, are in shock. And so many people on all the white picture are basically incensed. The ones especially in Caracas, there was this area, and I'll always bring this example, not because I'm happy it happened, on the contrary. This area of southeastern Caracas, in a southeastern Caracas municipality, that was pretty much damaged because of collateral damage. Houses that were destroyed of people who actually have been militant, usually against the Bolivarian revolution, opposition activists. And this is how sad it can get. This is a tough lesson for people that could expect that bombs actually are able to make a difference between, political affiliations. And it's also descriptive in that sense. But even before the bombing, even before us joining that horrible club of bombed cities, and the first one in the 21st century in Latin America after Panama in '89, and that was basically bombed. Yeah, it wasn't completely destroyed, but that doesn't make it less shock and awe, or traumatic enough for a population that wasn't used to this ever whatsoever, and that it has gone through enough already. But it hasn't shifted from what it was before the attacks and throughout the whole build-up and the pressure intensification during the Armada build-up, the hijacking, the psyops, everything that was going, and trying to create an atmosphere, a terrifying atmosphere that would accelerate the situation inside Venezuela without succeeding at any level. So this also, by the way, talks about the punishment I was saying. Even there are takes that Trump was actually all worked up because seeing Nicolás Maduro dancing, and that was one of the things that pushed the decision. So it even has that personal layer. It also has that personal layer, of course, in Marco Rubio, but that's another subject. Um, but that's how the punishment worked in that sense, And but things are still normal to the extent that normalcy still holds. And I think this is quite important because this has been like the most general resistance that Venezuelans have. And this is beyond one political faction. This has been a staple thing that hasn't been told enough and properly enough, I think, which is basically and I don't like the word resilience and the way it's being used, but this has been one of the most robust ways of Venezuelan resistance, the one of just upholding normalcy to a level that basically doesn't allow, the lowest manifestations to break up society and break up daily life. That's a priority. And this is, I think this is way beyond the politicized frame. And the other thing here is that most of the celebrations that we see are the diaspora in Bogota, in Madrid, in Miami, and other places. These are the footage, the real one that you're going to see celebrating the military as unprovoked assault on Venezuela. And this links up back to the first point, which is, for me, I mean, it shows how artificial the divide is at the end inside Venezuela, and the urgency to do that divide and rule procedure that it's heavily reliant on the diaspora, just like in Iran, by the way. And it shows that, at the final ratio of this, we are all the Venezuelan people. It's basically on the same side in that sense as in suffering. And I'm talking about grassroots, normal, day-to-day Venezuelans. I'm not talking about the political level yet, in which also it's the same. People are not that aware in the United States or the Anglosphere in general, and most don't want to be aware that there's an actual legal, moderate, coherent opposition inside Venezuela that actually is part of parliament, that also it's against the military strikes. It has been against the buildup. It has been against sanctions, and realized, at least in 2019, most of them, that they were about to go the same abyss in which Guaidó and his crowd went, and they were going to lose all political capital. And they took a step back and just basically rejoined the legal framework and became part of the consensus, because there was also an economic consensus that said that basically sanctions were impacting us all, and we all, including the private sector, we all have to move in the same direction in order to not allow the country's economy to collapse. This consensus was broken by people like Maria Corina Machado, basically, or not broken, it has been attacked, severely attacked by the Maria Corina Machado faction, which is the Marco Rubio faction, which is the extremist faction, that now also, because of all of this, like you mentioned before, we're seeing, first of all, someone that's not even acknowledged as capable of facing this moment of history. Second, a woman that celebrated the genocide and the bombing of her own country, including saying it was the right thing to do to humiliate Venezuelan migrants that were being deported and thrown into the Sequera in El Salvador or Guantanamo, which it also happened, and saying that was the right thing to do. And now we also are being scolded by the Nobel Foundation, saying that she cannot give her prize to Donald Trump. I mean, the humiliation of this.
Well, the Nobel Prize has demoted itself. They look so. Exactly. From now on, I'm not even paying attention to them. It's Mickey Mouse nonsense at this point.
But it's enlightening. I mean, this is you have to give that to Trump at least, and the reactions and the epiphenomenons after Trump, which is basically it's out in the open. I once read at some point that it's not now that the emperor, it's naked. It's that he has no tailor in the first place.
That's a very good way of putting it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not. I stole it from someone else. I really don't remember who. It will come to mind, by the way. David Goldman was the one who said that.
I resist the armchair psychoanalysis of Trump when people say he's a psychotic, he's a narcissist. I'm like, this is not what we should be doing. Because the mistake that Americans make, and Democrats most especially, they make the mistake of thinking this was his creation. No, not at all, folks. Obama did much more destruction in many ways on the level of international politics, drone wars, invasions of new countries. George W. Bush and he, to me, were the worst since 9/11. It's just phenomenal to me that Americans have this idea that because Obama's a good-looking, well-educated man, doesn't sound like a cowboy.
Well, exactly. It's not Israel's genocide; it's Netanyahu's genocide. You know, it's like that same point of contention. But
Exactly.
I mean, let's look at it this way: we had around close to 90 people, or even a bit more people, killed through extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean under the pretext of being speedboats taking drugs into the United States, but with no evidence and everything basically destroyed. It would basically amounts to war crimes and executions, extra-legal executions. Wasn't that precisely what Obama did with the drone program? Doesn't it come from that also?
Yes.
Didn't Obama deport even more people than Trump in that sense, with a very ham-fisted approach?
Yes, he did.
So
These are the inconvenient truths that Americans will not discuss on the left, or on the quasi-left, because it's not a left.
Yeah,
these are neoliberals. And this is another problem, because I swear to God, I was missing Ronald Reagan recently. I'm like, things were so much easier then, because he and Thatcher at least said what they were going to do. They did what they were going to do, as destructive as it was. And we're dealing with this other level of politics that, like you said about Sanders and the squad, these people, speaking of both sides of their mouths, hence you end up feeling more comfortable when you're on the left and you think about human rights, workers' rights, housing, education, healthcare, all these things that even we're finding out Republicans also think about, that you begin to trust the Republicans more.
Even Marco Rubio thinks about that.
Yeah, well, you begin to trust the Republicans more, because what I love about Trump, if I can say so, is that he tells you what he's going to do. He said, we want the oil. Obama would never have done that.
Trump broke the omerta, the imperial omerta, the mafia silence. I mean, he's just exposing it to the world. We got to give it to him in that sense. I mean, he's doing humanity a favor in that sense, if humanity is able to, learn the lesson.
This is the next step, because what do you see happening? Here you've got Trump playing pirate with your oil. He claims that the oil revenue will be used as reimbursement for damages caused to the U.S. This reminds me of Haiti having to repay the French for their slavery.
It is exactly the same thing.
It's insane. And then from an investigative standpoint, I'd have to wonder then, what legal or financial mechanisms do you believe the U.S. will use to justify seizing these assets? Because, come on, I mean, he goes from that, the tanker in the north, and then Greenland. I mean, he's just like got his guns ablazing, but he's sort of cartoonish in this because he doesn't have the international law behind him.
Well, he has his conscience, his own morality. That's what he says. That's what he said on that interview in the New York Times. That's his limit. That's where his boundary is, according to him. He doesn't like to hurt people and so on. I mean, yeah, but you have to give it to him in that sense, What's next? Yes. I mean, especially in this is like after Venezuela, and this, on the bigger picture, is the world after Gaza. Think about this. Tariq Siri Lamar wrote in 2024, I think, early 2024, one of the I think one of the sharpest pieces regarding this and how the Gaza method is actually operating, and it was basically shows, it basically consisted in most of it of this complicity, this silence of many of these actors, because this model of extermination and lawlessness can work to their benefit at some point. And he's talking about the West in that sense. He's talking about, well, yeah, Germany, France, all this, UK, all these countries that have technically and otherwise and diplomatically covered and supported the genocide. We're now taking a bit more of a distance regarding Venezuela because it's getting bigger and more problematic, even for them, even for their own standards. But that doesn't mean that anything like this is going to be stopped. It's regarding Venezuela, I think it's too early to call. I mean, I don't think it's going to change the framework. I don't think it's going to use any other different legal justifications than the ones that Marco Rubio is already using, because actually Marco Rubio is the architect of this, up to reaching this point, and he's also the crusader of all of this. And he has also his personal level with the, with the Southern Florida Neocon Yacht Club and the crazy Cubans, because this is all now it is turning, of course, about Cuba. The funny thing is, yes, let's take for a moment the quote-unquote historical perspective and historical justification that they are using now, after all the rest of the previous ones failed, as in the narco-state, as in Venezuela being able to meddle in the 2020 elections that make the Trump lost, and everything that didn't hold enough. So now they bring this excuse, this ahistorical excuse of Venezuela stole everything from the United States, and we have like the more developed shape of this nonsense by that ignoramus called Stephen Miller, like saying that all the Venezuelan industry was built by and set up by U.S. ingenuity, money, and assets, and so on. And this is quite just lame in the way they're justifying they have to recover the oil. Because first they're talking about the nationalization of 1976, which was the moment where the Venezuelan oil was nationalized. And this was also basically a requirement in the reshaping of the post-petrodollar order, and also to showcase some sort of petrodemocracy in Venezuela for the United States. And mind you, that boy that was paid back even far more of the price that all these oil companies were actually asking for. But by far, and it was made by Venezuelan human labor. Yeah, U.S. capital perhaps, the way it has all been repaid. But all of the rest is Venezuelan, on Venezuelan soil. And even at that point, the nationalization wasn't complete. And it was starting to be rolled back during the 90s. Parts of it, bits of it, was starting to get to be privatized again. Now under the 90s, dispossession privatized of public goods, privatization of public goods. And this is, by the way, when the Bolivarian Revolution reaches office and does this overhaul, first the refoundation of the country through a new constitution, and then the law regarding hydrocarbons and land, two different laws that actually were the basis and the triggers for the 2002 coup against Chavez that was defeated 47 hours afterwards with a popular counter coup. This is the starting point, because at that point it was basically reorganizing the terms in which Venezuelan oil was going to be commerced vis-a-vis the world, not only the United States, and the legal framework in which it was going to be done. And this also was the basis for, and here's also Trump saying, Trump complaining what happened with the definitive renationalization of oil in 2007 by El Comandante Chavez, in which all the upstream and downstream companies and also the interconnected services that were privatized were actually nationalized, and they were either paid for, bought for, compensated, or went into courts. The case of Exxon and ConocoPhillips, for example. Many U.S. companies were actually agreed and accepted the new Venezuelan terms of partnership with a 49% of benefits for the companies and 51% for the nation, for the Venezuelan country, for the Venezuelan nation. And I'm talking about Chevron, I'm talking about Valero, I'm talking about even Halliburton, that said on the Trump meeting in a few days ago that they went out of Venezuela because of the sanctions that himself and his own government issued in 2019. Halliburton, so, and Chevron. So just imagine that. This is precisely what's going on. But I mean, how this is another excuse that basically is going to fall at some point. It already fell, actually. But I mean, it's going to be even more diluted in this memory, anyway, in oblivion, like everything else in the short-term realm of social media and the nature of information landscapes right now. So yeah, but the fact that it succeeded in Venezuela to that extent, I mean, just kidnapping a sitting president has now made all of this that we've already mentioned impossible, and probably they will happen unless something serious is done to put a break on this on other places. For now, you can see a lot of rulers and countries are basically scared and managing their own situations individually with the United States, many of them, I think, in Europe and Latin America and otherwise and elsewhere. But it's a big open question.
I love and hate social media always at the same time. I don't think I'll ever purely love it. And I'm looking at my wall just at this moment. I got an alert because I'm putting up information about what's happening in Iran. On the show, we've had people come on and discuss the fragmentation that occurs. Fabio Vighi recently, who came in and talked about the fragmentary power of these micro discourses that people like Ernesto Laclau, Chantal Mouffe talk about back in the 80s, the way that feminism is now with Iran. If it's feminist in Iran, you're going to lose. And I have this nonsense on my wall. Iran is a hellhole, especially for women. I watch the videos of millions supporting their government, men and women alike.
Yes.
You've just lived through this nonsense of our country's assault on yours. People killed, and that's gone. That hasn't been mentioned in CNN. They don't care about what would be called collateral damage. They don't care about those Venezuelans. It's so vile. What do you think about what's happening now and this kind of manipulation? I mean, it is propaganda coming out of Western media.
Yes. I mean, first, by the way, Fabio Vighi must be one of the brightest minds around right now. I've got a lot of respect for his work. And he's right also, by the way, because the way in this balkanized approach basically just, weakens the higher and undisputable argument of this is all based on lies. I went to Iran twice last year. Twice. One before the attacks and a month before the Israeli assault, and then a month afterward to cover with a group of journals and social media activists and so on. So I actually know, and this was an Potemkin thing, and I was able to engage on a very personal level to them. I have friends now there, colleagues, and I know what they think and feel about what's going on in their country. And beyond that point, and we'll get into that in just a moment, but beyond that point, the kind of malaise, the kind of hardships, daily hardships, frustrations, and so on that the Iranians are going through are the ones we are also going through. And it's based on sanctions and exploiting weaknesses and so on. And regardless, I mean, there are big differences, of course, but this describes how inorganical are these causes and how disingenuous they also are regarding especially and particularly the women subject in Iran. Mind you, you can see now in Tehran that the whole veil, the whole hijab thing, it's just so childish. And you can see, I mean, I have friends that are radical anti-imperialists, very close to left-wing thinking, who actually wear chador, and they reivindicate their chador, their chadoris. And you have people wearing something in between, they're just hijabi, or they're just not doing it. And that all happens at the same time. There's no problem, at least in Tehran. That's what I saw, and I was all around. It wasn't only in northern Tehran. I went also to southern Tehran. By ourselves, a group of friends did. Not only me, I mean, there's even a footage of that with Max Blumenthal. We went there, and he recorded in this Behes Sahara cemetery, which is the Shahids cemetery, the martyr cemetery, of all the struggles in which Iran has been fighting, defending religious minorities, defending statehood, and defending in that way their own country. But going back to the point, I mean, it is, and yes, I recorded with Andreas Landeck, a German filmmaker. We recorded a lot of testimonies of friends of ours, what happened and how they felt during those days, and what they felt afterwards. And it's just what you could expect of any country that has actually a dynamic civil society, where a lot of discussions are held and a lot of freedom of expressions, it's tolerated. Other things are, of course, not tolerated. But you're going to see so many nuances, in the sense that maybe some people, for example, are not happy with the current government, but they're not against the system. They're not against the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. They're not against his Islamic democracy.
Well, this is the thing that happens in the media, though, Diego, is that we're given Iran like a fractured society, the mullahs. We hear about the mullahs. It is the most, perhaps, my family will kill me for saying this, but even my family, when the first time I went and met my family in India, they were always in reverence towards Iran and the Parsi culture that is a huge part of Indian society and history and culture.
Yes, there's a lot of connections.
Iran has one of the most amazing literary, artistic, musical
traditions. Yes,
I mean, it is embarrassing what I'm seeing.
It's a cultural and civilizational powerhouse. I mean, big time. And that's probably one of the most sophisticated societies you're going to see. And yes, of course, there are shortcomings, there are contradictions, there are issues. They have their own discussions about this. They have mismanagement. They also have corruption. They have what country doesn't anyway. But it's not the defining elements of this country. Like you said, I mean, this is, and I insist on this. It is, like you say, of the literary tradition. I mean, everything. It is a civilizational and cultural powerhouse, and a scientific development powerhouse. This is also so important. I mean, Iran is top 5 worldwide on many fields, like nanotechnology, for example, AI, STEM careers, academic activity. How many, under these indexes, how many papers have been submitted by scientific Iranians from the scientific universities of Iran? I mean, they have a very powerful academia in that sense also. And nothing of this is talked about. I mean, and I was there after the bombing. And of course, I thought about it when seeing what has been attacked here. The homologation of, residential area, basically, in the case, brought down into rubble, and the rest of the building, just showing the insides of the houses, the intimacy of families, the refuge of families, their home in the integral sense, which involves also not only the present, but also the dreams and the memories. And Jesus Christ is so brutal. And also, what people don't know either, that this also makes us even closer in many ways, Venezuela and Iran in that sense, because it's the same threat, it's the same enemy, the same interest, the same obscene and vulgar way to try to destroy societies and to use whatever leverage they have to divide. In Venezuela, we don't have those strong ethnic dividing lines that other places have. And neither they have it in Iran, regardless of their diversity. You know, the Persians, the Azeris, the Kurds, the Arabs, the Lor, or the religions. I mean, there are Christians, there are Jews in Iran. They have been for a long time. It has the largest Jewish community in West Asia. And just, you know, try to erase everything this and homologate it and turn it into that biomass they need in order to, I don't know, to impose this worldview. By the way, now it's AI'd worldview, and it's the cloud robber barons, in which they need, in order to control, which includes surveilling and the censorship you just mentioned, they also need all these resources, because that's an energy intensive and demanding business in order to make everything work, which also explains, and it goes full circle regarding what they want to do now against us and what they are already doing and will intensify against people in the West, in the collective West, to use the Russian terms, because Venezuela is also a Western country, you know, but of course on a different status. We are from outside of the wall. We're not inside of the sacred circle, but we're West nevertheless.
I have a friend from Caracas, Carlos. We discussed the use of Terzo Mundo, and we don't really like Tercer Mundo. And he likes, it's a novel also by Diamela El Tit from Uruguay, El Cuarto Mundo. So I sort of like that designation, fourth world. I'm not a big fan of the global south, don't like it. This is just part of lexicon that changes all the time. I am very envious you went to Iran. I go to Armenia often, and every time I'm in Armenia, I'm like, I want to go to Iran. Might happen soon, though. Again, my Facebook wall. The obsession with the burqa or the hijab or the chador, it's like, enough already.
Yeah. Mind you, this is uncommodified women. And this is what bothers, you know, all these markets we're talking about regarding, you know, the world of women and the feminine in general. I'm not saying feminist. They're not commodified by the system. They're not turned into merchandise, you know.
That's exactly it. Exactly it. I have a wonderful friend in Saudi Arabia, and she said to me once, well, Julian, the problem with Western feminists is they do exactly what my government does to women, but they do it in the inverse. The more naked you are, the freer you are.
Positive discrimination, yeah.
And I find it all very disturbing, because if you're going to have as your ethos that women are intelligent and have agency, honestly, shut the fuck up. Iranian women are some of the most educated women on the planet. They are intelligent. Look at the videos. They're on the streets supporting their government. Their government really, I mean, like or dislike your government, they have elections. But the mullahs, you want to talk about mullahs? The fact is that from the time I read that Facebook comment until this second, I was actually blocked by Facebook, probably something I posted on Iran. They said I was repeating content. I wasn't. I never repeat content. It's just they wanted to get my pro-Iranian on the streets messages cut.
Yeah.
I clicked on the button. I'm now unrestricted again. But you know how this happened? It wasn't AI that did this. These were the feminists. They reported me. I was reported because I won't say the chador is the most oppressive thing. Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly.
Yet, some of the most, and I go to film festivals, especially the Locarno Film Festival, I go to every 2 years, and I can tell you for the last 20 years, these are the countries that dominate in the awards, okay? Mexico, South Korea, Iran. Iran might actually be at the top of the list. The most beautiful cinema is coming out of there.
It is a tradition. Film, and I mean, they have a museum of cinema in Tehran, which is just lovely. And then the way they justify it from the even pre-Safavid area, and the way they told the story with shadows and lights and so on, and they bring it all the way to Abbas Kiarostami, you know, and all the film industry they have, which is incredible. I mean, they have the best film. They have the best film, one of the best film traditions in the world. They have it for a long time already. That's absolutely true.
We are given Iran, and this is what I like about what Saeed talks about, and he's been doing this for years, that the West doesn't realize how propagandized they are. I've got these women, even a dear in real life friend who just wrote me, so all of us in the US protesting ICE and Trump's tactics are, by your logic, paid actors, Antifa, of Putin. If citizens rise up against a tyrannical government, they are being manipulated. We'd love to see some kind of evidence of that. Because I was posting articles that show that Western media is taking the pro-government marches as anti-government protests. This is from someone who speaks one language. And this is why I think a lot of this comes from Americans being unable to even cross the language barrier. Because the language barrier, you see it. You know, ABC, Australia, to BBC, to CBC, to NBC. It's all the same shit. I'm really despondent about what's happening because it's almost as if we're in a not even West versus East kind of paradigm anymore, but definitely a Anglophone European versus the rest of the world paradigm.
It seems that way.
And getting out of it, I don't know what's going to happen, where the UN can hold session and not denounce the kidnapping of your leader. This is, to me, revolting. What do you see happening? Because what I love about Maduro is when he's been photographed in the handcuffs, he makes the peace sign or he makes some kind of positive sign. But this is going to be hard on him, what he's about to live through.
Yes, I mean, and also, they try to Roman parade him in a way, as a trophy. I think they were trying to get that picture of him being defeated and humiliated and conceding defeat. And you haven't seen that in any of these pictures. And he's also doing, I'm going to go jingoista one more time here because I've been saying this before, but he's also going full Caraqueño with that provocation of, asking Cilia Flores, his wife, how do you say it? Good night? Yes, good night. And saying to the press, good night, Happy New Year. And also even not only the smiling and the I'm okay, I'm alive, but also he did this, and this is it has become now emblematic, which is he was shackled, and at some point he just did like this, which basically says, nosotros venceremos. It's not victory, but victory. It's nosotros venceremos, we will prevail. And yes, but people don't think how much he has already faced up to this point, being one of the most vilified people in the world, one of the most misrepresented characters in the world, who has been already survived several assassination attempts, terrorist plots, and so on, and has been able to outmaneuver everyone for more than a decade. And I'm talking about everyone. I'm talking about the West. I'm talking about the US. I'm talking about Obama. I'm talking about Trump, and being able to keep the country at bay of civil war, military destruction, and so on. And this is now the case again. Medvedev, former president and prime minister of Russia, said that he could become now some sort of new Mandela. And I think it is humbling for many people to see precisely how he's facing all of this, and how, according to the takes of the reporters that were inside the courthouse during the first hearing, the way he actually stood up, what he said, the way he stand firm, taking notes, not being basically, subdued by the moment, shows the true character and the true colors of Nicolás Maduro. Regardless of how many people actually were able to despise him because of the poison we're talking about, and because of, transferring all the responsibilities upon him and so on. And and his image being affected. But it was already a thing that wasn't happening anymore because people realized here in Venezuela how he was able to control the country in moments that were pretty dangerous. Think about the COVID with sanctions, with maximum pressure, for example, waiting those waters and the uncertainty, and keeping the societal cohesion. Think about everything that has been done to bring over money and food inside the country in order to not to die by asphyxiation. Think about everything that he has been able to achieve up to this point, regardless of the systematic destruction of the state structure. And now think of him facing empire without showing any sign of cowardice or fear, regardless of, yes, I agree with you, one such a tough test for him and for her, for Cilia Flores, who's sharing her destiny there. And according to what they say, this wasn't supposed to happen. She just didn't allow him to go by himself. So this also adds up to the drama in that sense, and also shows you, first, what kind of leader is able to, to stand to this level of heat. And second, what kind of society has been able to endure all of this, especially in Latin America or in the Western world in general. I mean, I can think of very few examples who are also able to do what Venezuelan society has been able to achieve just because of the persistence of just being, allow them to be, to exist without falling into the abyss. And I think this is important because these are things that also bring forward values that are not transactional, that are not cynical, and that also involve the realm of the immaterial and spiritual. It involves the realm of actual beliefs and believing that some things still have substance, such as dignity, independence, sovereignty, and the absolute right to live under our own terms, regardless of what we have to face. And I think this is important. People have to think about this when they are the ones, people in the West, people in the United States, also in Europe, when they are facing the threats and the challenges they're already facing right now.